Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DABCC TV. I'm excited, as I always like to say about this episode, as today we have the AppSense guys on the line, or not the guys, one of their guys. We have a gentleman named Oliver Sills, who is the Senior Product Manager of AppSense's Environment Manager, which is a pretty slick solution. I was actually over in the UK just a couple weeks ago with these guys. They were nice enough to invite me over to show me the all this great stuff that they're creating and have been for quite some time. I've actually was very first introduced to AppSense way back in October of 2001, and when back then I love this story, so I'll tell it to you guys. But back then, my manager at the time, I was working for Citrix, and my manager called me up and said, "Hey, Doug, what's the biggest problem with Citrix?" And I was like, "Printing." He's like, "What's the second biggest problem with Citrix?" And I was like, "Performance management." And he's like, "Yes, you got to check out these AppSense guys." So they had a really neat solution called Performance Manager, which is a part of the AppSense suite that we're going to talk about a bit today. But today we're going to talk about the Environment Manager. So with no further ado and no more rambling for myself, I'd like to introduce my guest for today. And this is, again, Oliver Sills, the Senior Product Manager of the Environment Manager. Oliver, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
No problem, Doug. It's good to speak with you again.
Why, thank you. Okay, so just real quick, I just want to give a little bit of background and have people understand, who the heck you are, and so, who are you? Who is Oliver Sills, and what's your responsibility over at AppSense?
Sure. Well, I've been with AppSense since its inception in 1999, so almost 10 years now.
Wow.
So more or less part of the furniture. As you mentioned, I'm the Senior Product Manager, specifically for the Environment Manager products. We have a team of product managers, each dealing with a different product. So my specialty is Environment Manager. My background includes working on support desks, managing support, pre-sales, consultancy. So, I've worked in a number of different roles, both within AppSense and also in other organizations. And I've finally settled on my Senior Product Manager role here at AppSense.
What is Environment Manager? Can you tell us about Environment Manager?
Sure. Environment Manager is part of the AppSense Management Suite, which is designed to handle what we call user environment management. Now, what we mean by that is how a user logs on, where a user logs on from. We want to handle that user's settings. So we can enforce specific settings on a user when they log on, so you can see certain drives maps and printers maps, etc. But we also want users to be able to personalize their environment. So, for example, if a user changes their desktop background to show a picture of their wife or their child, or if the user manipulates settings within an application, that user will want those settings to be consistent the next time the user logs onto a session, be it a physical desktop or a virtual desktop.
Well, good. That sounds a lot like, profile management, but this is obviously a lot bigger than just simple profile management, correct?
Very much so. The majority of profile management solutions out there on the market tend to handle profile settings when a user logs on or logs off. And that's really all they do. So when a user logs off, it saves out settings from the registry and file folder settings. And then when a user logs back on again, it restores those settings into the registry and into the file system. Environment Manager is a lot more advanced than that. Rather than handle these settings log on and log off, we actually do it at application launch and application close. And what this means is we can actually stream down personalization settings between open concurrent sessions. Be that session a physical desktop session, a virtual desktop session, a published application, a streamed application, it doesn't matter to us.
Okay, so in front of us right now we have the AppSense Environment Manager, it looks like console. Is this what you want to show us first, or, hey, have at it?
Yeah, what I'll do, this is the new Environment Manager 8 console. It's split into two main areas, as you may be able to see on this navigation bar. So we have what we call the policy configuration side of the console. And what this allows us to do is to configure actions for the user or the computer. So, for example, when a computer starts up or shuts down, we can apply certain actions. When a process is started or stopped, we can apply actions. From a user perspective, when a user logs on or logs off, when a process is started or stopped, when a network is connected or disconnected, or all these different what we call action triggers, we can then apply actions at those points. So, for example, when the user logs on, we can map a drive, we can map a printer, we can set some environment variables, for example. When a particular application is launched, we can lock down the application, we can self-heal certain things. So there's a number of different actions and conditions which we can apply within Environment Manager. And I'd like to come on to the policy configuration side a little bit later.
Okay, sounds good.
Now, the second side of the console is something called the user personalization side. So we've briefly touched upon the policy configuration side, which allows you to set up actions for the user, so apply default and enforce settings. The user personalization side of the console is used to allow the user to personalize their own desktops and have those settings persist between open concurrent sessions. Okay? Now, before I actually show you any more of this console, what I'd like to do is just talk you through the architecture a little bit of version 8 of Environment Manager. We actually have a three-tiered architecture. So we have the Environment Manager agent, which needs to be installed on each managed endpoint, okay, be it a physical desktop, a virtual desktop, whatever. We have the second tier, which is what we call the personalization server. Okay, now, this is effectively an IIS website, so it's just a web front end. It's effectively a broker to the third tier, which is a SQL Server database. Okay?
Yep, makes sense.
So
go ahead.
So if I just minimize my console for a second, you'll see that I have three virtual images here. So I have a Server 2003 image, which is actually contains my personalization server and my SQL database. So it contains my Tier 2 and my Tier 3. I then also have an XP Client 1 and an XP Client 2 machine. Okay? And each of these client machines has the AppSense Environment Manager agent installed upon them.
Perfect.
So,
now you have this agent, and excuse me if I'm getting ahead of ourselves or getting ahead of myself, but how would we go about getting that agent down to these workstations? Is this something that you guys have built into version 8, or is this something that we need to use group policies or existing, application deployment mechanism to send that down to the clients out there?
Okay, we have a number of ways of getting the agent out onto the endpoint devices. We have something called the AppSense Management Center, which allows you to essentially deploy out all our Environment Manager agents, our configurations, and our other product agents and configurations to thousands of machines on the network based on OU membership or based on computer group. It's completely up to you.
Very cool.
What we can also do is we can package our agents up into MSI format so you can deploy them out using Active Directory or any other third-party deployment system.
Very cool, very cool. So if somebody has a solution already in the works or something they're already utilizing, they can just use that. But if not, they can use your the built-in solution that comes with version 8. That sounds cool. Okay, please continue.
So what I'd like to show you now is the new Environment Manager user personalization side. So if I quickly select my first XP client, what I'm actually going to do here is, as this user, I've just logged on as a test user, and this user is using a mandatory profile. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch Notepad user. And what you'll see is Notepad is launched in the center of the screen. If I just move that around a little bit and just put it more in the center there. If I now close Notepad and go onto my second XP client, what you'll see is when I launch Notepad on this machine, it's retained the settings that I had from my first client. So what we're actually doing here is we're sharing personalized settings across these open concurrent sessions. So I don't have to log the user off and I don't have to log the user back on again in order for the user to get the latest settings. So let me make that a bit more visible for you. So if we look at the font, which is currently set on this XP Client 2, it's set to this Lucida console. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch to something a bit more visible. So let's say script. I'm going to put it in bold, and I'm going to set the font size to font size 72. So you can now see that we've got a nice, strange font in there. Now what I'm also going to do is resize the Notepad window and actually move it on screen as well. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close Notepad down on this second client and go back to my first client and launch Notepad again. And what you'll see is it's picked up those personalization settings across my open concurrent sessions very, very quickly.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And all that is going back to the personalization server via IIS. Is that correct? Via HTTP and HTTPS?
Yeah, well, how this works is when the user logs onto a session, when they start to launch applications, what happens is we create what's known as a local personalization cache on the endpoint that the user is logged onto. Now, as the user starts to manipulate settings within the application, rather than those settings be written to the physical registry and file system, what we actually do is we virtualize those settings. So we virtualize the registry and the file settings. Okay, and we store those in our personalization cache. So effectively what we're doing is we're abstracting the personality, the personal settings the user has made from the operating system and applications and making them portable. Now, what then happens is when the user closes the application, the local copy of those personalized settings are actually being transferred across via the personalization server and stored in the SQL database. So we've now got a local copy and we've got a centralized copy. So if the user logs on a second concurrent session and launches the same application, we actually stream down the personalized settings from the centralized database.
Oh, very cool. Now, what would happen if I'm on an airplane? You know, I'm out in the UK, I'm flying back to the US, and I'm working away. Obviously, I have this cache that you just talked about. I take it stores this information in the cache, and the next time I log on, it refreshes the personalization server and back to the SQL database, correct?
Yeah, by default, what happens is when the user logs off, the local copy of the personalization cache is wiped, effectively, by default. And the reason for that is if you're using this on terminal server environments, for example, you don't want 50, 100, 200 users logging on and starting to build up this personalization cache, because it's effectively like having a local profile installed. So what we do at logoff is, by default, we wipe that personalization cache. However, what you can do is you can set up what's known as personalization groups and actually switch those groups into what we call offline mode, so that when the user logs off and becomes mobile, the personalization cache is retained on that particular machine, so it actually becomes mobile with them. So they can continue to personalize applications and settings whilst they're offline. As soon as they connect back to the network, it will synchronize the latest settings with those in the database.
Perfect. Now, what happens if a user is in a remote location? For example, currently at this moment, I'm sitting on my LAN in the DABCC offices, right? But when I'm out in the UK, and let's say I'm at AppSense, I'm not on my LAN. So does that update the central, communicate back with this personalization server at that point? Is from let's say a desktop perspective, again, I have my laptop, I'm logging into my laptop, or is that going off of the local cache?
Right, this is a highly scalable solution. So what you can actually do is you can set up multiple personalization servers that share the load amongst many, many thousands of users. Additionally, what you can also do is set up what we call branch sites. So rather than have the SQL database just in one location, you can actually set up a branch site that contains a duplicate SQL database and its own local personalization servers. The data between the databases can actually be replicated on demand. So if you have users actually traveling between different locations regularly, you can replicate the data in the UK SQL database, for example, the US SQL database very, very quickly and very easily.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, enough questions. Let's get back to this. What else? What else are you going to show us?
Sure, no problem. So as you can see, I've personalized Notepad here as this user. So I'm just going to close that down for a second. Now I'm going to go back into my management machine. So this is the machine that's got my personalization server and my SQL database on. But it's also the machine that's got my Environment Manager console installed. So I mentioned briefly that we have this concept of personalization groups. Now, by default, we have one group in there, so it's called the default users group. And this is effectively a catch-all group. So if you haven't created any other personalization groups with any what we call membership rules, then everybody will fall into this default users group. Now, what you'll see is if I click on the Settings tab, we have a number of options within here. The first option that you'll see within here is something called Manage All Processes. Okay? So out of the box, when you install Environment Manager, all you need to do is ensure that this Manage All Processes checkbox is switched on, and instantly it starts to manage all your applications for you. So it discovers the applications that the user launches, starts to manage all those personalized settings for you. Okay? Now, alternatively, rather than do that, you can create a whitelist of known applications or a blacklist of applications that you don't want to manage. Okay? Now, you can use a combination of the manage all processes and the blacklist. So, for example, I can turn manage all processes on. It can discover every application that my users are launching, and then I can start to hand-pick which ones I actually want to add to my whitelist. And I'll show you that in a second. So, what I can now do is if I select my default users personalization group up here in the left-hand tree view, if I go to my Tools menu, I have an option here called Personalization Analysis. If I click on this, what this allows me to do is to start to build up a picture of what settings have been manipulated by my users. So we can base settings on application size, the usage of the applications, and something called available archives, which I'll touch upon in a second. So I can generate reports on individual applications or by user. So I'm going to generate reports by user. So all I need to do is click on this large display button. Now what this will do is it will go off into the database and it will pull back all the information from the users that have logged onto my managed endpoints. And what you'll see is my test user is shown here in this graph. And it's showing that my current profile size is pretty small. Now what I can actually do is I can click on this bar chart for this test user, and what it does is it drills down into that user's profile and splits it up into the individual applications. So what you'll see is it's actually discovered notepad.exe here, so that's the only application we've run as this user. Now you'll see in this legend here on the right hand side we've got this concept of discovered applications and managed applications. So a discovered application, which is shown in blue in this graph, is an application that's been discovered and managed by the manage all processes option. If there was a managed application within here, it means that it's an application that I've specifically chosen to add to my whitelist to manage. Now I can actually convert a discovered application to a whitelisted application very easily by just right-clicking here, choosing to add it to my default users whitelist. Okay? Or alternatively, I can add it to my default users blacklist. Now what we can also do here is we can actually edit the application registry settings that the user has made. So if I click on this option here, okay, this just gives you a warning that editing registry settings may cause inconsistencies, so be careful.
I love those screens.
We like to warn on users.
It doesn't stop anyone.
So what this does is it presents me with a browser that shows me the settings that the user has personalized during their session. So if I now start to expand this, it shows me the registry keys that user has manipulated. And what I can do is if I scroll down here, you'll see that the font is currently set to script. So as the administrator, what I can now actually do is right-click here and edit that to change it from script to webdings, for example. And I can go to underline and change it from 0 to 1, so it's now underlined, and click OK. If I now go back to one of my client machines and launch Notepad again, what you'll see is it's now webdings, now underlined.
So that's pretty cool. And what's so neat about that is not just that you did that centrally, but you haven't logged out of these XP workstations yet.
Not at all, no. It's all happening on the fly as the applications are being launched.
And that was pretty darn quick, too. I mean, obviously you're running on, VMs all on the same machine, so, I imagine maybe it's slower in a real environment, or?
Not at all, no. It's all the information is actually very small in size, and it's compressed before it's actually sent across the wire, so it's very, very speedy.
Very cool, very cool. Okay, what else is there? This is, I know there's a lot more, so what are you going to show us next?
Sure, no problem. Well, let me show you this working with some other applications as well. So if I launch another business-critical application, Paint. Okay, what you'll see is Paint is launched in the left-hand corner of the screen. So what I'm going to do is just move that around. I didn't really want to do that, so what I'll do is just do that. I'm going to close Paint down now on my first client, go to my second client, and launch Paint again, and you'll see that it picks up those settings. Now just to prove that it's happening both ways, if I move some toolbars around, and just resize this window slightly, close that down, go back to my first client machine, relaunch Paint. Again, it's picks up those personalized settings. I've not had to specify any registry keys that I want to manipulate, any folders or files that I want to copy out. It covers those settings for me and does it automatically. Now, what I'll also do is if I now launch Word 2007, for example. So, launching Word, it's launched rather large on my screen, so I'm just going to manipulate that so it's in shot there. So, Word is nice, it's blue, I like the way it looks and feels, so I'm just going to close Word down. I'm going to go back to my second session and launch Word on this session, and you'll see that it's picked up the same personalization settings, so it's actually in the same location, the same color, etc. So I actually like the way that Word looks and feels at the moment. So what we can actually do, we can actually take a snapshot of those personalization settings for that user for this specific application. Okay? So how we do that, if I go back into my management machine, I have this option here which is Available Archives. Now what I can actually do here is type in the name of my user, S, click Display, and what that does is it brings me back a list of the things that are currently being managed or being discovered for this user. And what you'll see is discovered Paint, Notepad, and Word. Okay. Now, I like the way that Word currently looks and feels, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to select Word here, right-click, and choose to archive WinWord. And what this does is it actually takes a snapshot of those personalization settings, stores them as what we call a profile restore point. So if I could continue there, those settings have now been successfully archived in the database, and what you'll see is it's actually time-stamped that archive that I've just taken.
Very cool. That's almost like document revisioning, but for it's application revisioning.
Very, very similar, very similar. And as you can see, it gives me the size of those personalization settings for Word. Okay? Now what I'm going to do as the user, I'm going to go back into one of my client machines. So let's go into Client 2, for example. I'm going to launch Microsoft Word again. I'm going to start to make some changes to Word. So let's go in here. I'm going to go to the Word options. I'm going to change the color scheme from blue to black. I'm going to change the default save format from docx to plain text. And the proofing, I'm going to change the custom dictionary from all languages to French Cameroon, because that's obviously a very well-spoken language.
Speak it every day.
I'm going to go into my view menu. Let's put some rulers and some grid lines on here. Let's also put the document map on. Okay? I'm going to resize this application and move it around on my screen. So I'm going to close that down now. I'm happy with those settings. I'm going to go to my first client again. And what you'll see is it's automatically picked up all those settings for me. So if I go back into my Word options, proofing, you'll see that it's currently set to French Cameroon on my second client. And it's default to saving in plain text. Now, as the user, I've actually made some settings there that I'm quite unhappy with. So I've caused some inconsistencies in how I usually use Word. Now, what would normally happen is you would have to delete the settings somehow. So it might be wiping the profile and starting from scratch. If some of the profile settings get corrupted for any particular reason, you'd have to wipe the whole profile and start from scratch. We don't need to do that anymore with Environment Manager 8. What we can do is just close Word down, go back into my management machine. I have my archive here, which I created earlier. All I need to do now is right-click and choose to roll back to this archive. Click Continue, and it's successfully rolled back. So if I now go back...
Now, that rolled back just that application, not the entire profile, right?
It's just that application settings just for that specific user. Okay, so you can be very, very flexible with how you use the archive.
Oh, that would be cool. I can use that for my personal use when I mess up Outlook and I change the little columns up on top and I'm like, what happened? What happened to all my columns? So I could just go back in and say roll back Outlook to yesterday, or can you do it to a point like maybe Apple Time Machine where it does it every hour, or do we have to take snapshots of that?
Right. By default, what we do is we take one snapshot of the whole database every night. Okay, so you have a whole snapshot of every user's personalization settings for every application. We store, by default, 5 days for that. Okay, so when it goes on to the 6th day, it starts to override the first day. so on and so forth. Okay? Now, that's great because you've always got a snapshot of one user's settings from the previous day or the day before or the day before. So if a user phones you up and says, oh, something's gone wrong, I don't know what's happened, you can say, well, when was it last working? And you can actually roll it back to that particular setting just for that. Again, as an administrator, you can then take individual manual archives as and when you wish.
Now, is this something that an end user can do, or does the end user still require to call the help desk?
At the moment, the end user will have to call the help desk, but what we've got coming for version 8.1, which is a few months down the line, is we're looking at rolling out like a system tray utility for selected users or all users. It can be flexible. And what this will allow users to do is to take their own snapshots and actually roll back to their own archives.
Oh, very cool.
So independent of actually making a help desk support call.
Very cool. But yeah, when they call the help desk now, they can just basically say, hey, you know, my Outlook's not working. All my menus are messed up. And the help desk could say, well, when was the last working? You say, yeah, yesterday it was working just fine. They go back into this tool that you just showed us, roll back that one application's profile settings, and then away you go, right?
Exactly.
Oh, that's cool.
If I launch Word now, previously it was black with grid lines and the document map. If I now run Word one more time, what you'll see is it's actually restored it back to the archive snapshot for me.
Very cool. Well, that's very impressive, and I can see this demo's nice. You know, you showed us multiple workstations, but when you start thinking about having these VDI out there, and then your terminal services apps and your Citrix apps, it's one profile now. No longer do I have different settings across the board. And I do this in real time. I'm not being forced to log off my daily workstation, because for me, I log into a Vista machine every single day I come to work. But yet, Vista's not everything for me. I have some TS remote apps. I have my VMware VI3 client running on Citrix. You know, I have a VMware VDM and some Citrix and desktop VDI workstations that I like to log into. For example, like IE8 is in one of them right now. And but now I can have one consistent profile across the whole shebang. Exactly.
From a personal perspective, you know, I spend a lot of time building my laptop how I like it, and then if that hard disk fails, I have to build it all up from scratch again. Okay, so what this enables me to do is to just install the applications on a clean build of XP or Vista or whatever, and then instantly just overlay my personalized settings again. So I'm up and running very, very quickly.
If you're using something like virtualized applications, I imagine you probably have this built into it. In fact, I know you have some SoftGrid. Do you work with some other virtualized apps? How does that work? Can you show us some of the SoftGrid integration that you have? Or I guess Microsoft calls it AppV nowadays.
Yeah, sure. The user personalization side of things will handle applications streamed by things like Alterius SVS, by Citrix streamed applications, by SoftGrid applications. It doesn't matter to us. You don't need to make any different changes. It will just instantly abstract the settings from one application, and it will treat it as exactly the same as if it was a physically installed application. Now, what we also have is, if we go into the policy configuration side of the console, for example, what I can do is on my logon node, if I just create what we call another node beneath there, what I can actually do is from here I can actually start to create different actions. So I can do things like registry actions, so create keys, delete keys, set values, manipulate files and folders, drives and printers, create database settings. But what we also have is something called a SoftGrid wizard. Okay? Now what this allows me to do is to manipulate the settings within an existing OSD file based on how a user's logging on, where that user's logging on. So very easily what I can do is start to extend the functionality of Microsoft SoftGrid Application Virtualization, or AppV. So I can import an OSD file from either the server or that's been locally installed on the client machine. So let's just try this. Let's click Next. You choose where the OSD file is going to be selected from. So I have a test OSD file on my desktop, which is very handy. Click Next. What that does is it brings the existing OSD content into console. So you can see here that this is Solitaire. It's called softgrid.exe for some reason, and it's supported on XP 2003 and thermal server. What we can do is start to manipulate these settings. click Next, we can then actually push out the icon onto the desktop, okay? So we can choose where the shortcut's going to be. We can actually select an icon file if we so wish. We can then start to manipulate environment variables within this OSD file. So these are the environment variables that are currently available on my local machine. But what I can also do is start to add my own one. So I can set an environment variable called Doug and call it USA. And it's added into here. I can then start to manipulate registry settings, so I can start to browse from the registry and start to add settings within here manually and add those into the OSD file. Again, we can actually start to launch scripts either while the application is being streamed, while it's being launched, or after a shutdown based on JavaScript, Batch, or Perl. And at the end of this wizard, what it does, it gives you a summary of your changes and gives you a snapshot of your updated OSD file.
Very cool.
Click Finish, and what it's done is it's actually created that soft grid action for me. So what it's going to do now is when the user logs on, it's actually going to take a copy of the existing OSD file, manipulate the settings in there, and what I can then actually do is actually apply different conditions to this soft grid action. So for example, I could say, if the user is an administrator, okay, so here's my is administrator rule. What I can now do is just move these rules round.
Oh, very cool.
This soft grid action now depends on whether the user that is logging on is the administrator. So if the user is an administrator, then the soft grid shortcut is going to be put on the user's desktop, and the settings are going to be manipulated just for the administrator.
So I imagine these rules and conditions, I can make sort of a hierarchical, I can't say that word, hierarchical. I'm not even going to attempt to say it, Oliver. I can create a tree structure with all these different rules. So is administrator if coming from maybe ICA or RDP, if logging from, external network, things like that?
Very much so. So what I can do is I can start to build up a rules list. I can start to add Boolean conditions in here. So for example, if I set a computer IP address rule, I can add an IP address in here. Okay.
That's my router. If you're coming from my router.
So what I can now do is start to move these around. And what you'll see is when I move two rules together, these rule conditions here have now been ORed. So if it says if the computer IP address is equal to 192.168.2.1, or the user is an administrator, then run this soft grid action. What we can also do is add those conditions together. So it says if the IP address is this, and the user is an administrator, then execute this action. So we can start to build up a flow of rules, conditions, and actions all within the right-hand pane of the console, and very easily start to build up a complex policy for our users.
Very cool, very cool. And not to overshadow, I didn't get to say how cool this was. The fact that you can create OSD files for SoftGrid on the fly. That is pretty neat stuff. I hate creating OSD files because I'm no good at it. Someone, there's listeners out there, dog, I do it every day. I'm really good at it. Yeah, but can you do it this quick based on conditions? That's pretty neat stuff.
It's very, very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what else? There's much more. We like to keep these things sort of short and sweet, but this is pretty verbose. So please, what else would you like to show us?
Sure, yeah. I mean, if you look at the different types of actions we have something called a quick setup wizard. So if I just go down here and add a new node in here and call this node 2, for example, what I can do is launch this quick setup wizard. And what this does is it offers the user or offers the administrator a list of well-known and recommended settings for different scenarios. At the moment, as this is in beta, it's only got a few settings within here. This will be fully populated for our full release. So what you can see in here is we've got some Internet Explorer settings. We've got some specifically for XP and Server 2003. So we can do things like disable periodic checking for Internet Explorer. We've got some lockdown settings, so we can do things like disable print screen from being pressed. We can hide the address bar in Windows Explorer and also in Internet Explorer if we so wish. We've got some miscellaneous settings in here, so things like turn off autoplay, delete cache copies of roaming profiles, disable Windows Installer. And we've got things like self-heal, so we can self-heal files, services, registry items, and even processes. So if someone makes a malicious or accidental change to a critical component of the operating system or an application, we can revert it back to how it was in real time. Okay,
That's very cool. Can you go a bit deeper into the self-healing? Or maybe this is something we can do in a few minutes here, but I wanted to learn more about the self-healing.
Sure. Okay. I'll just finish with this wizard. So if I just click Next here, what this does, it gives me a summary of the options that I've chosen to select and click Finish. And what that's done is it's helped me to start to build up a configuration. So as you can see, it's built up actions for my Internet Explorer. It's built up actions for my lockdowns. If I double-click on one of these, you'll see that it's blocking print screen for all applications and so on and so forth. So it's removing the complexity of building up an application. So the quick setup wizard can help new users get up and running with Environment Manager very quickly.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Now that's assigned based on conditions and rules and all that jazz, right?
Yeah, at the moment we've got no conditions in here, so these actions would apply for anybody who logs on. But what we can then do is we can start to add conditions within here as well. So the conditions can be based on directory membership, user conditions. We have different computer conditions such as MAC address, IP address, computer name. We have session and client conditions like screen resolution, color depth. So it's very, very flexible. You can even create your own custom conditions using JScript or VB scripts as well, if there's a condition that's not currently available in the console.
Very cool, very cool. Well, self-healing to me sounds like something really neat. You know, I like that. I don't have to heal it. It heals itself. So what is self-healing?
Yeah, sure. What self-healing allows us to do is to ensure that settings that the administrator has made are not altered by the user, either maliciously or accidentally. So, for example, I could make a setting to the registry that I want to enforce on my users. Okay? If a user comes in and changes that setting, what we can actually do by using the self-heal registry setting, for example, is put that registry key or that registry value back to what it was immediately. Okay, so if something comes along and, for example, attempts to populate your run key so that the next time you log on it tries to execute something, we will instantly remove that addition to the run key without you having to intervene at all.
Very cool. So if there's a virus that's trying to, infect your machine, this can almost heal that, right?
Very much so, very much so. I mean, we can basically say that we're protecting your protection as well. So, for example, if you've got antivirus software installed and someone tries to delete some files that are related to that, or stop a service, or stop a process, we can make sure that process is restarted, that service is restarted, and that those files are always in place.
Cool, and that happens right away?
That happens immediately on the fly, yeah.
Cool, very cool. Okay, anything else you'd like to show us?
We also have some lockdown functionality as well. This is quite unique to Environment Manager 8. And what this allows us to do is to actually remove parts of applications or disable parts of applications. So, for example, you might have an application that's very complex, but you've got a not-so-clever set of end users. Trying to be quite nice there.
Really? Does that happen in IT?
Not in our organization.
Not at AppSense.
I'm sure that happens out there somewhere.
It happens at DABCC. It's called me.
So rather than confuse the end user by presenting them with 50 options within an application, what we can actually do is we can disable some of those options. So we can do things like remove menu items, we can remove buttons from the application, we can stop the user from clicking on certain areas of the application. So we can actually dumb down the application, if you like, and make it less complex for the end user. What you can also use this for as well is to actually patch up security loopholes. For example, if you roll out an application that's got a link that allows you to get to Internet Explorer, for example, you can lock down that security loophole very easily with using the lockdown functionality.
That's very cool. Or maybe a web application that you're running inside IE and you want to remove the address bar. Very
much so, yeah. Very much so. So to do that, what I would do is, for example, if I, just very quickly, if I launch Notepad as an example, Notepad is here, and I've currently got access to all the menus. So what I would want to do as the administrator is lock down some of these menus. So I would launch my general wizard here, my general lockdown wizard, and what it does is it presents me with this spy utility, this spy tool. Now, what I need to do is just click on the spy tool and hold it down. And what happens is when I hover it over certain areas of the application or the operating system, it provides me with the details of what type of control I'm locking down. So the desktop is a list control. These are menu controls. This is what we call an MFAA control. So if I release it over these menus, what it does is it brings me back a list of the menus in Notepad. So as you can see,
oh, cool.
that list there replicates what you're actually seeing here. And then I can actually choose to start locking down these menus within Notepad. Okay, and click OK. And there's my lockdown action. So very easily, I've locked down Notepad. The next time that user launches that application, those menus are disabled for them.
Yeah, well, that's actually been, you guys have had that since with the App Toolkit, right?
Some of the Environment Manager features were actually born out of our old server-based toolkit. So we've taken the best bits of some of our old technology and improved on that and made it a lot more comprehensive.
Anything else you'd like to show us?
Okay, Doug, so there's one other thing I'd like to show you. We have the ability to also manipulate group policy settings as well. So what I can do is if I go into my logon node and add a node within here, what I can do is choose to start to manipulate group policy. So I can set an ADMX policy if I'm on Vista or 2008. I can also set an ADM policy if I'm on XP or 2003. So I'm currently on a 2003 server, so I'm going to choose Set ADM Policy. And what I can do is now click Add, and what this does is it goes off and brings in all my policy settings. And I can start to manipulate those settings from within here. So I'm looking for, let's say, for example, Hula. I'll pick the wrong one there. So let's start that again. So I'm looking, for example, for Profile. So if I just type Profile in, what it will do is actually go through here and it will search.
Oh, wow.
The settings that contain the word profile. So very easily I can start to...
So if someone tells you, yeah, man, there's this key or there's this policy, you're like, God, I'm drilling through all these ADM files looking for this darn policy. I know it was here somewhere. I don't have to do that anymore. I just type in and it just goes finds it for me.
You can just find things very easily within your policy settings.
Oh, that is awesome. I hate searching ADM files. I hate it. Oh, that's very cool. So that's very cool. That's very cool. So what else? There's more, right?
Yeah, so what we can now do is we can actually double-click on one of these settings and enable it. We can type things within here, so C colon in there, for example. Okay. And what you'll now see is it's added that setting within here, and I've now got my ADM policy setting, so I can just deploy that out to machines across the network. So very easy, I can start to replicate existing group policy settings or start to add cumulative policy settings on top of existing AD settings and just deploy those out to thousands of machines across the network very easily.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool. Well, I'm very impressed. You know, I've always sort of thought of solutions like these, I must admit, as sort of a nice to have. But nowadays with VDI and server-based computing and, you know, terminal services, Citrix, local workstations, and all these different, you know, login points that we have as users, this is no longer nice to have. This is mandatory. Yeah. And and what you guys have put together this is impressive because, you know, not just everything you showed us, but the fact, I think the killer feature that you guys have is you do this on application launch and shutdown. And that is just amazing, Oliver. I'm very blown away. And I was, you know, like I said, I was out visiting you guys not long ago and was very impressed with everything. So thank you so much for taking the time to show it to us.
No problem at all.
As always, I'd like to give my guests the last word, and if there's anything we missed, please show it, and or just you know, have the last word.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank you for allowing me to speak today, and I've enjoyed it. So I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Absolutely.
We've got a lot of interesting stuff coming in our roadmap as well. Some stuff can talk about, some things that can't. So, for example, we have a feature coming in the next version called Personality Templates, which will allow us to actually take some personality settings from an existing user and then just overlay them over a different user. So, for example, we have a very large development team here. We've got about 65 guys in here, and we're recruiting all the time. And in order for these guys to get up and running very quickly, it'd be nice if we could just overlay existing personality settings from an existing developer over that new developer, and they've got access to all the, you know, all the tools they need and how they're set up correctly very, very fast. And we'll be able to do that with our next version.
Very cool. Very cool.
Okay.
When can we expect the next version? Now that we just have this one, we want to know what's coming, you know, when we can get the next one.
Yeah, version 8 is we're looking at releasing in fall, so around November time. Version 8.1 is going to be probably about 6 months after that. Don't hold me to that because the development team will kill me.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're looking at probably a 6-month release cycle between major and minor versions.
Very cool. And then obviously existing customers, they get the minor versions for no additional cost, or is there an upgrade, or how does that work?
There's an upgrade cost on top of their licenses, works out about 18 to 20%, I think. But again, don't quote me on that because the salespeople will kill me this time.
Yeah, we're engineers. We don't know what things cost.
I don't deal with pricing.
Yeah, exactly. But very cool, very cool. Now, okay, someone's excited about this. Where do they go to learn more? Can they download an eval of this?
So the version I've showed you here was the beta version, but it will be available for download from our website at appsense.com. Go and have a look and download the software.
Okay, Oliver. Well, I guess we'll conclude it. But before we do that, this thing's so verbose. There has to be something else you want to show us. So is there anything else you'd like to show us? I guess you have up reusable nodes. What's this all about?
Yeah, effectively what this allows you to do is to reuse different areas of the configuration elsewhere without having to recreate it. So, for example, I have a Windows XP and Server 2003 node here. What I can actually do is I can go up to my Nodes menu, choose to clone that, and actually copy it to reusable nodes. And what you'll see is it's actually made a copy of that node that I've got down there. And what it then means is I can go into a different node and actually reference that reusable node. So rather than having to create a large section of configuration again, which means your configuration gets larger and larger and larger, which could affect your logon times because it's having to run through all these different actions and conditions to actually process them. What it does is it references an area of the configuration that's already been made, and it means that it's a lot faster for user logons than user logons.
Oh, that's very cool. So you can basically create a library, let's say as a consulting company. Let's say there's consultants out there watching. They can create a bunch of rules and things like that, maybe some custom OSD files, right? And they can take those from customer to customer to customer. Is that possible?
Very much so, yes. So, for example, if I go to this lockdown node here, you'll see that I've got 4 actions within there. What I can actually do is, from my ribbon bar up here, we've got this AppSense Policy Templates option. Now, what this allows me to do is to export that lockdown node as a template. So I could save that to my desktop, for example, call it lockdown. Okay. Now, if I choose to now create a brand new configuration, okay, so I'm not going to save that config, so all my nodes have disappeared. But I want to reuse that that lockdown stuff that I had earlier. What I can do is go to my logon node, choose AppSense Policy Templates, and choose to import my AppSense Policy Template. So that area of the configuration that I configured before. So I'm going to choose to import. And there's my lockdown template, just in the form of an XML file. Click Open, and what you'll see is it's recreated my lockdown node, and it's brought back in my actions that are going to lock down my system for. So very easy, you can start to build up a library of configuration snippets, if you like, and reuse those elsewhere.
That's very cool. Now, one thing you guys had shown me when I was out visiting was about slow login times. And I can imagine people are out there thinking to themselves, well, gee, I can go crazy with this. The next thing I know, my login times are going to be really slow. How do I go about troubleshooting this? You guys actually have a built-in solution to look at the actual login process. And you can use this not just to help troubleshoot your login, the AppSense portion of the login, but the Citrix login or the workstation login or any type of login. Is that correct? Can you maybe explain this real quick?
Okay, so we have a debugging tool which effectively allows us to start to generate debug log files based on Environment Manager. But rather than just on Environment Manager, it also details all the startup, all the logon times as well. So you can actually start to build up a picture of how long it takes for your user to log in based on Environment Manager actions, but also other actions that are taking place outside of Environment Manager, such as group policy settings.
Oliver, I mean, we can go on and on and on and on about this, and we've already gone way over the time. I like to keep these things around 30 minutes, but that's because this is an amazing solution, and I guess it's version 8, so it's been around for a while, and it's good stuff. So again, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to having you back on the show at some point and even diving even deeper into these solutions. Sound like a plan?
That sounds great. Thank you very much for having me, Doug. It's been great.
Hey, thank you so much. And, of course, I'll give you the last word. Anything you'd like to say to the DABCC TV listeners?
Just like to say we've got some great stuff coming out in the future as well. Our developers are working very, very hard. We've got some good guys in-house, and we're very excited about the future.
Well, I definitely am too. It's a wonderful time to be in IT, as I always like to say. So, Oliver, thanks again for your time, and I will chat with you soon.
No problem.